Welcome to this presentation. My name is Davide Garassino. I work at the University of Zurich, and today I will present the result of a joint work with a colleague, Francesco Cangemi, of the University of Cologne. In this presentation, I will focus on the relation between durational patterns and intonation, based on the analysis of Northern Italo-Romance data. But before starting this discussion, it is important to have a look at the typology of final lengthening. As is well known, the lengthening of segmental elements plays a key role in signaling the end of a prosodic unit in many languages of the world. The type of lengthening that signals the end of an utterance is usually known as final lengthening. Current typological research has investigated the relationship between this type of durational effect and vowel length. The interplay between them is not trivial, since the pressure induced by this phonetic lengthening may have a major impact on the phonological and perceptual distinction between short and long vowels. In this regard, we observe three main strategies on which quantity languages rely for coping with final lengthening. The first one is represented, for instance, by several Bantu languages, in which unconstrained lengthening of short and long vowels results in phonemes of ambiguous duration, and thus possible perceptual confusion. The second is also characterized by unconstrained lengthening, but this time is tempered by the presence of other acoustic cues on which listeners can safely rely for distinguishing short and long vowels, such as vowel quality in Swedish. Finally, we have constrained lengthening, especially in languages that signal vowel length contrast, mainly through phonetic duration. In this case, short vowels are more likely to display sealing effects compared to long vowels, as in Estonian and Hungarian. In our opinion, this broad typological picture can be further refined by looking at micro-typological variation and by considering other acoustic cues that are well known to interact with duration and prosodic structure, such as F0. First, we should introduce our two Romance varieties, which belong to the same group, namely the Ligurian dialects, and only differ in one crucial feature, vowel length. These varieties are Genoese and Ventimigliese. Let's start with Genoese. In this dialect, vowel length contrasts are observed independently of word structure and stress, even in protonic syllables, as you can see in the example 3 in the table. Moving along the Ligurian coast to the left, towards the French border, we find the varieties spoken in the town of Ventimiglia, Ventimigliese. In this variety, contrasting vowel length, according to the literature, is not present anymore, but it used to be. So, for instance, whereas in Genoese, one observes a difference between the short and long U in frutu and brutu, the words for fruit and ugly or dirty, in Ventimigliese, the duration is actually the same. So we have frutu and brutu. In light of the previous discussion, we intend to address two research questions. The first one regards the strategies displayed by Genoese and Ventimigliese in coping with final lengthening. The second adds the role of intonation to the picture by focusing on the interplay between vowel duration, sentence position, and F0. Concerning the data, they were gathered from 10 interviews with native speakers, 5 for Genoese, 5 for Ventimigliese. The average age of the Genoese informants was 68, and the average age of the Ventimigliese ones was 56, with some internal variation, especially in the Genoese group. The target items are words shared by both dialects. Only in Genoese, however, they are meant to represent some minimal pairs. In this research, we have relied on the measurement of the stressed syllable, which you can see in blue on the slide. Each speaker was asked to translate short made-up sentences from standard Italian into their own variety. The sentences were declarative statements uttered without a context and with an intended pragmatically neutral meaning. The target items occurred in two different sentence positions, internal and final. Finally, only 364 of the expected 400 stressed syllables were analyzed. This is due to some missing values. In order to explore the data set, we can rely on this graph in which the x-axis represents syllable duration in the sentence final position and the y-axis syllable duration in the sentence internal one. Each target syllable produced by each speaker is represented in the graph. Let's start by considering syllables with long vowels in Genoese, the squares. If the duration of the syllable is the same in both positions, then the square is superimposed on the diagonal. For example, let's say that here we have the stressed syllable of fruto produced by a certain speaker with the same duration, 400 milliseconds, in the two positions. If the duration is longer in the final position, the square appears below the diagonal. And finally, if on the contrary, the duration is longer in the internal position, the square is above the diagonal. In this graph, we see that syllables with long vowels in Genoese tend to be longer in the final position, since the majority of them are under the diagonal. Now, we can add syllables with short vowels, the red dots, to the graph, as for instance the stressed syllable in the word bruto. It seems that also syllables with short vowels tend to be longer in the final position in Genoese, but the situation is less clear than before, and we'll come back to this point in a minute. Moreover, the squares and the dots do not overlap that much, which means that syllables with short and long vowels should be quite distinct. We can now direct our attention to a comparison between Genoese and Ventimigliese. Taking into account vowel length, in Genoese, syllables with short and long vowels significantly differ. In Ventimigliese, even if the black squares and the red dots tend to overlap to a greater extent than in Genoese, the difference between them is still significant, as you can see on the slide. But when it comes to final lengthening, whereas in Genoese, the sentence final position has a significant lengthening effect, in the Ventimigliese data, it is not the case, since most syllables with short and long vowels are in fact in the upper part of the graph. So it seems that in the Ventimigliese data, syllables with long and short vowels are longer in the internal position. Moreover, Genoese seems to conform to the third typological strategy seen before, which is characterized by a sealing effect for syllables with short vowels. The lengthening effect thus concerns above all syllables with long vowels in this variety. In order to answer the second question, we have to take into account F0 mean values, duration, and sentence position. Let's start with the Ventimigliese data this time. Here, in this new graph, the color black stands for the final position. So, black filled triangles, as this one, for example, represent syllables with long vowels in the final position, whereas black empty triangles, as here are syllables with short vowels in the final position. On the x-axis, we find absolute syllable duration, while on the y-axis, this time, we have mean F0 values. Now, red stands for the sentence internal position. The insertion of red filled triangles, which stand for syllables with long vowels, as here, shows that these syllables receive a higher F0 value sentence internally. This impression is also confirmed by looking at short vowels sentence internally, the red empty triangles, as here, compare to short vowels in the final position, the black empty triangles in the graph. Comparing the Ventimigliese data with the Genoese ones, it is apparent that F0 is lower in the final position in both dialects. It is not surprising since we are dealing with declarative sentences, but a closer look reveals that Ventimigliese has generally higher F0 values than Genoese, both in the internal and the final position. Unfortunately, it is difficult to draw much information from this graph concerning the interplay between our three variables, sentence position, F0, and syllable duration. If you want to explore this three-way interaction, we should move to a more complex statistical analysis. For this exploratory study, we have chosen conditional inference trees and random forests, which are non-parametric methods that seem to suit well cases like ours, in which not much data is available and complex interaction between different predictors are expected. So first, based on the formula that you can see on the top of the slide, we have obtained a tree which predicts the probabilities for a syllable to be Genoese or Ventimigliese, depending on 5 variables. This tree shows the structure of the data by highlighting the role of 3 variables, F0, position, and duration, and their interactions in discriminating between Genoese and Ventimigliese data. As pointed out by the three-way interaction between position, F0, and duration, the probability that an internal syllable has higher F0 mean and duration, as we can see in the rightmost bar plot on the slide, is greater for Ventimigliese. So it seems that Ventimigliese syllables tend to have a longer duration and higher F0 in the sentence internal position compared to Genoese. Moreover, the likelihood that a syllable in the sentence final position has higher F0 is also greater for Ventimigliese, as shown by the two-way interaction between the predictors F0 and position in the first branch of the tree. Importantly, as we can see, duration is not involved in this case. Finally, the utmost importance of F0 position and duration in this dataset is confirmed by a random forest model, which results from constructing a large number of conditional inference trees. So, by way of conclusion, our analysis has shown that, contrary to expectations, vowel length contrasts are perhaps also present in Ventimigliese. Stressed syllables are longer in the final position in Genoese, but not in Ventimigliese. So actually, Genoese shows unexpected patterns in terms of vowel length and behaves like Estonian and Hungarian when it comes to final lengthening. And finally, syllable duration, F0, and sentence position significantly interact, resulting in higher F0 values associated with longer stressed syllables in the Ventimigliese internal position. Due to lack of time, we cannot discuss all these issues, and we therefore refer to the paper. But we would like to offer a final thought on the puzzling behavior of Ventimigliese, which can possibly be enlightened if we consider the role of intonation. Based on our data, We can speculate that the sentence internal position in this variety needs to adjust to a higher F0, lending further support to current research on the impact of post-lexical accents on lexical material. In our case, more precisely, the higher F0 might be the consequence of intonational differences between Genoese and Ventimigliese. For example, in the number and type of tonal events that are expected to take place sentence internally. However, it is also possible that these differences in F0 are instead the consequence of the speaker's reaction to the task. Despite our aiming at pragmatically neutral interpretations, it is possible that some speakers inferred and realized some form of contrast on the target words, maybe due to their nature as minimal or subminimal pairs. In order to dispel this possibility, as a next step, we are analyzing data of different nature, such as connected speech gathered from map task and spontaneous conversational data. Finally, we wish to thank you very much for your attention. For all bibliographical references, we refer you to the paper. Thank you again, and bye.